G'day guys, back with the Outer Circle, and in today's episode we're going to be looking at the Blood Angels range in this range review. So, let's kick things off, shall we, with the original Blood Angels helmets. These are really nice. I like them quite a lot. The one I like least is the fat helmet here, because the sort of extra gorget meets mouth visor piece, it kind of feels like a slap on over the top of one of these helmets. Which, funny enough, are the helmets I like the most. The ones which have sort of this completely flat face with the teardrop, I really like those. And I like these ones that are sort of more like a stylized Mark IV with like the little blood drop and such. They're neat. I really like these helmets. They have a lot of character. They are clearly different from the standard armor types, although you can see the Mark IV heritage in them. And the bare head is rather pathetic and boring, but hey, is what it is. I also really like the little sort of angelic halo thing going on them. That is very old school Blood Angels, and I think it suits them to a T. Then we get to the new Mark VI heads, and look, people think I have a bit of a problem with Mark VI. I don't have a problem with it in general. I think there are legions who are far better suited to it. My problem with the use of these Mark VI upgrade heads is that clearly they were a bit of a sales tactic. Okay, they decided for whatever reason to do Mark VI as the main box set and to make these heads the focus of the box set upgrade kits. And really it doesn't work. The legions having all this stylized armor with all this extra bling added to them, well, it doesn't really make sense because the bling is something that's added over time. You know, and for suits of Mark II that might have been in use since the start of the Great Crusade, it makes sense for them to have a lot more bling. Whereas brand new suits of Mark VI, if you're just churning these things out because you just need armor for the battlefield, it doesn't get stylized the same way because there's no history to it yet. You know, it's fresh equipment. And so I don't like many of these helmets just because they don't tell the narrative that I picture in my head very well. And these ones in particular have zero character. Yeah, they've got some gold trim and such on them, but you can almost see the design process here, the thinking behind it, like, oh, well, we need to add like some trim of some kind on here. Well, where do we do it? Well, we can't do it on the nose. It's just a pointy beak. Where should we put it? Well, we could do something like a teardrop down the eye. No, let's just slap some gold and a teardrop on the helmet. And frankly, if they didn't have the gold on there and it was just the teardrop, it would probably look better. Whereas you contrast all these helmets and what they could have done with these helmets. Well, for a start, there's more unique designs here, but little things like this little halo I was talking about, the spiked halo, they could have added those on, you know, or this line of trim that runs up the center of the face and then around to the sides, they could have done something like that. Basically, they had options and they chose essentially the laziest one because it's the same gold trim pattern repeated on every one of these helmets. Then they just changed where they put the slots in. And for those who are curious, that is a 5-minute job in any sculpting tool. So this is not like a lot of time and effort and such went into this. I do like the bare head much more in this set though. And I don't mind the beaky sort of sergeant's helm, but I would not go out of my way to buy the set for either of those things. Anyway, going on from there, we get to the Contemptor dreadnought. And this was okay. And only okay. I don't like the new stylized sort of wing that they have for the Blood Angels in 30k. I'm very mixed on how I feel towards it. I don't love it, don't hate it, but again, definitely don't love it. And this type of gold trim around the outside, it's not the worst, but I'm not a fan of that trim. And we'll talk a lot more about that later. And the last little quirk of it is the helmet on it looks very much like a Grey Knight's helmet. And this is something you're going to see a lot of, again, as we go through this Blood Angels range. The things that I do like about it is the sort of size shape of the teardrop gem. Great. The gem on the helmet, fine. And I love the stylistic sort of halo around the helmet slot. Looks really, really good. As far as Contemptors go, this was one of the weaker ones I felt in the original Horus Heresy releases, and it's made even weaker now by the fact that there's all this gold trim on it, and then it's nowhere else on the torso because, apart from on the torso I should say, because they decided it should now be a plastic kit. Then we get the Incendius class dreadnought. So this is the dreadnought which has part of the Saturn V rocket jammed up its backside, which is great because it can achieve suborbital flight. Now, part of this is the paint job. I think if these weren't solid gold, these little sections of filigree on the knees and crutch with the paint job, I think if the gold was picked out on the raised sections, this would look better. And I actually think as a design, this dreadnought over time has become my favourite out of the two, with the exception of, was this honestly the best they could do for the back? Because it just does nothing for me personally. Opinions may vary, of course. I really like it. I think it's mostly a pretty good dreadnought, even with he's got the assault fist hands and, all sorts going on here. Fine, great, whatever. It does the job, okay, it works. But it wouldn't have been my go-to pick on every little part. I prefer the trim that comes over the top of the shoulder pad, like on the Death Guard Contemptor. I think that would have looked really good here. And I think if this torso had that halo of the other Contemptor, it would be the best merging or blending of the two. But yeah, I don't hate it, and it has a nicer helmet than the other one as well. I just wish that instead of this ridge on top, this sort of, I don't know what you want to call that. Let's call it the blowhole. If it didn't have the blowhole up on top of it, and it had the gem, that would really help it. But yeah, solid design, and just these little bits of filigree and such on there. It works for me. Then we get to the Leviathan dreadnought. Again, it has this, see the Blood Angel's icon on the chest? Perfect. That's my desired shape. The one on the leg, like on the other Contemptor's chest, I'm not a huge fan of it. And painting it, also not a big fan of it. This trim pops up again, of course, on the torso. I do like that this kit includes the assault cannons because it's just a natural great weapon to take on a Leviathan dreadnought, although it is very pricey. But hey, you're taking a Leviathan dreadnought. You've already committed to paying those points. I don't like the grill, the lower half of the visor, again on the helmet. That really, it just looks like Aegis armor out of 40k. It just does nothing for it. It's also odd how it has the Legion numeral on the left shoulder pad, nothing at all on the right. A little bit asymmetry going on there, and it just sort of feels like a slept on afterthought, like, oh, we need to make it feel more Blood Angels-y. I don't know, put a numeral on there. Doesn't feel like it was a natural progression of the design aesthetic, because you look at the legs, you've got all the trim deliberately put onto sort of the waist, upper leg section, the gold trims there. You've got the gold trim all around the torso, around the head of the miniature. You've got blood drops and skull icons and filigree and all sorts of stuff going on. And then you just sort of have two blank shoulders, but with a 9. I don't know, it just doesn't offend me in any way. It's just a bit odd. But I really like the design otherwise. And yeah, it is one of the nicer designs out there for the Leviathan. Then we get into the Iliastus pattern assault cannons. I spoke about them in the Imperial Fists range. These assault cannons are available to more than just Cataphractii Terminators. So why have they only ever released these upgrades for Cataphractii Terminators? Can't get my mind around it. Yeah. Then we get to the Angels tiers. So now we're starting to get into the Legion Elite Specialist Unit territory. And we have two flavors here. So we have the grenade launchers, which, yep, they're grenade launchers. The grenade launcher is the same on all of the guys. There is nothing Blood Angels about it. There is, no big changes made to the miniatures. So let's just focus on one of the Angels tiers sets. The Volkite pistols. Now, one annoying thing to point out, you only get to pick grenades, you only get to pick the Volkites. You don't get to pick a mixture of the two. They don't include the extra arms or weapons in one set. This is kind of frustrating, especially because there are two other weapons available off the top of my head to these guys. There are, I think, heavy flamers and assault cannons are also options that the unit can take. So if you want to take those weapons, well, they don't include the arms that you need in order to actually put those weapons onto the models. And they aren't really compatible with the new range of resins and such. So the new range of plastics that have come out. So it's kind of annoying for upgrading the set. When I look at these models as well, they have this very unique armor, and it's not interesting like the Sanguinary Guard of 40k, but it's trying to ape on that with these stylized chests. Now, I like the stylized chest. What I don't get is the single giant crutch plate underneath that, and this identical 3 teardrop winged icon underneath. It's like they sculpted one version of this model and then they just reposed it with pretty much no changes, except for they moved this icon that you can see on the knee here and the shin of this guy. They just moved those around on the miniatures. They'll have the exact same trim in the same places, and it just feels very lazy. And I guess it's meant to be like a reinforced Mark IV, and you can kind of see behind the legs there's like little pistons to help them, but none of the other Destroyer variants have those. It's odd, you know. It's like up armored Mark IV, but then the chest doesn't have any extra armor. It's just like the crutch and the lower legs, and then like this butt plate here, the upper butt plate is like extra armor. It's some weird stuff going on with this unit. And then we get to the helmets. I don't hate the helmets, but I do hate them for Blood Angels. I think these helmets are screaming to be Emperor's Children helmets for like miniatures who have upgraded like sonic weapons of some kind, you know. This doesn't look like the sort of helmet that I imagine for a Blood Angel. I think a traditional sort of Sanguinary Guard style death mask would have looked far more interesting. Think Titus of Gaul from Gladiator. You know, just this blank, emotionless face. Having the Vox grill in the front of it, that tall, almost open-mouthed screaming Vox grill, doesn't look at all like I picture Blood Angels. And yeah, I think the unit's a bit of a letdown, a bit of a wet fart of a unit. Then we get to the Dawnbreaker cohort, and yep, the helmets. That's immediately what I look at, but it's not just the helmets. There are 3 things going on here. First thing is the helmets. Those are pretty much Grey Knight 40k helmets. They don't look right on 30k models. These guys really needed more 30k style helmets. Then you've got the gun. The grenade assault pistol twin barrel crappy looking where you can't believe it's not Grey Knight's gun, because that's what these guys look like. They look like proto Grey Knights. Instead of halberds, they've got the spear. Instead of Aegis armor, they've got this Mark IV but with an Aegis looking helmet. Instead of Mark IV shoulder pads, they've got these sort of pseudo Mark VI shoulder pads that look like Grey Knight pads a little bit. Instead of pistol weapons, they have this not Stormbolter grenade launcher supposedly stuck on the arm. They just want to be Grey Knights, and they've even got the little loincloth and everything. I hate this unit as sculpted. But there are 3 changes, and I know this because I've personally made these changes, that dramatically improve the look of this unit. Number 1, head swap. Immediately go and look at these heads and picture putting those into the unit. Second, get rid of that left arm. Change it out so that instead of being that left arm twin grenade launcher thingy, it is the same as the right arm. In my case, I 3D printed replacement arms for them. Then the next option is changing out the shoulder pads. Put something else in there. There are so many great STLs, but failing that, just use Mark IV shoulder pads, because having this lopsided trim on the bottom edge of them only, for whatever reason, it just doesn't look balanced enough. And I tried a range of different shoulder pads to see if it was just me feeling like this. But there were definitely shoulder pads that look better on here. And they needed that bit of gold trim, because once you start painting the backpacks, as you can kind of see, you sort of end up with this no color variation happening at the top of the miniature, because the gold cuts off the bottom of the shoulder pad and then it's just matte colors above that. It doesn't look quite right. And I guess the 4th thing that you can do, and the 3rd problem with the unit, the stupid flying stands ripped straight out of 40k. No other unit in 30k needed them. Why do these guys have them? And we can throw a 4.5 complaint on there, which is why do they have such stupidly long loincloths? And why they just look like they're being lazily nail-gunned onto the belt. So there's a lot of issues with this unit. Now, what did they get right? Spears look great. The legs themselves look great. The backpack is one of the nicest backpack designs they've ever done. The sort of 3-engined jump pack design, which also has a Blood Angels icon / logo on the jump pack, which I think looks really, really nice. So yeah, they got that part right, but that's pretty much it. If it's just the weapon, the majority of the legs that doesn't offend, and the backpack, I think it's safe to say your unit has problems. And a lot of people I've spoken to about the Blood Angels range in the past seem to have the same sort of feelings I do. I know that's anecdotal, but I think many of you would agree. Nothing about these guys feels very 30k beyond the fact that they got some square knee pads and maybe the paint coloring choices, I don't know. But the helmets and that left arm with the horrible grenade launcher that we swear these guys aren't designed to look like Grey Knights. Yeah, no. Sanguinary Guard might have been a really good choice, just saying. Alright, Crimson Paladins. These guys suffer from the same thing that many other units do. In fact, that the Angels tiers suffer from, which is, here's a lot of war gear, especially custom unique war gear that you and only your unit can take and only your legion can get. By the way, we don't sculpt any of it. And not only that, we're not even going to give you all of the parts you need to have an identically armed unit. I can speak for pretty much everyone when I say that is really frustrating. Like, add a few extra swords in there, you know, or add a few extra shields or whatever it might be, because otherwise it's kind of a pain in the butt. Now, as a design, these Terminators have an obvious major flaw to me, and I spoke to another person who does a lot of 3D sculpting. They agreed, so I'm going to say that this is 100% true and everyone in the world agrees. And that is the legs look too small on the bodies because they've been wasted away. What do I mean by that? Well, the legs have a sort of cutout. Let's see if I can get a more precise picture of it for you. So there's this flare look, like Saturday Night Fever pants, you know, where it's wider at the ankle and at the knee than it is in the middle of the shin. And it's further emphasized by having the trim there, which of course bulks it out to a greater degree. Then with the posing chosen on the miniatures, you now have torsos which look significantly longer than the legs. And it doesn't look right to your brain because you know that torsos, even on Terminators, shouldn't look longer than the legs. It's like the legs were put on there at 95% of the scale of the torso that they should be matching, and then they just produced it anyway. And it really hurts the unit. But apart from that, I quite like them. But then you fall into this other little category of, okay, maybe I do want to swap out all the weapons and such. Well, swapping out the arms becomes a bit of a pain because they've got these leather straps with blood drops on every one of them. Really cool, really iconic, but it means that changing out arms becomes a lot more difficult because now you want to keep that so that it suits still. And I don't like this. Now, the torso, the gold filigree across the chest, the little conic point at the top of it, love it. Looks fantastic. I also think they've got just the right amount of trim and gold and gems and little accessories all over the armor. So all of that stuff is perfect about the unit. It's just the legs really let them down. You've also got things like this one assault cannon. One assault cannon sucks, and this unit's main buff comes from having those shields. I would rather have more of those shields, and like this is clearly meant to be an elite Terminator unit that can contest the field against other elite units. A pair of assault cannons is not doing that. You don't have enough firepower to make the investment in the firepower worth it. So I don't know why the developers of the game have it in their head that people want more of this. They don't. Just make the arm a separate part that you sell in other kits or something. Then you get to ones like this one, which when we get the 3D view up, you can see also the sword is wasted away, but it works here. The shield's not even correctly aligned on one of these guys. Yeah, see the the handle of the shield in the hand wasn't glued on correctly. Nothing to do with the miniature, I just thought it was funny. But the trim across the chest with that head in there, very Emperor's Children, in a good way though. And I wish they had more of that kind of trim and filigree, and the filigree that's up here, either side of the blood droplet, that's only been painted black for some reason, matte, flat black. Yeah, must have taken photos before they'd finished painting it, because every other gem is painted on this miniature. Laziness in Forge World, I know it's shocking. Anyway, sometimes you've got to hit that deadline. The trim looks great, and it makes you wonder because this trim is used pretty much nowhere else in the rest of the Blood Angels range. Instead, they went for this horrible, lazy trim. And I find it ironic because in the novels, we're told about how the Blood Angels seem to just effortlessly look beautiful. You know, that they just seem to wear it naturally. And the Emperor's Children seem like tryhards. Like, they've got all this gold and bling and gems, but it doesn't really suit them. It's like they're trying to look more fancy than they really are. In the 30k tabletop miniatures, it's the polar opposite. The Emperor's Children range is far superior to what we get in the entire Blood Angels range. So, funny how all that worked out, I guess. And then we're on to the characters. So, Blood Angels Sergeant in Terminator armor, Tartarus to be specific. Well, the miniature looks nice enough. I don't have any particular hates of any kind. I think the trim, although being the same as like on the Dawnbreakers, it seems to have been, maybe it's a little bit finer in detail, and it looks a lot better for it. And they've used a bit more actual filigree swirls rather than just the sort of, we'll call this the fishhook pattern that they have going on around the shoulders and the torso. The fishhook pattern and this stupid one going down the upper thigh. It looks much, much better on this model. The sword looks nice as well. The fact that the arms aren't cloaked, there isn't a big cloak coming over the shoulders, means it's easy to change the arms. Great, fantastic, which more miniatures were like this. But you may notice a slight problem here. We are being sold a Tartarus Terminator for a Legion which has Cataphracti Elite Terminators. Why do they insist on doing this all the time? I get it, it's cool, looks great. Who's it going with? Oh, it's not going to go with Cataphracti because then the Cataphracti lose their hardened armor, basically. They lose that heavy reroll, but they suffer all the movement penalties still. So Tartarus and Cataphracti do not complement one another at all in this game. It brings them down. Really odd design choice. Speaking of odd design choices, this gem's painted gold, this one's painted red. This is a constant thing I see with the Blood Angels range. It's like they just forgot to do things throughout or change their mind on how they were going to do them partway through. You saw there's a bunch of Terminators with mismatched gems, and the Praetor also has them. It's way to make you feel like the range is just rushed out the door and it's just, who cares what they look like? Just buy the product. If you're going to do that, just show it to us in grey resin. We're crying out loud. Then we get to the Power Armoured Praetor. Has the nicest Power Armoured helmet out of the entire current sort of newer range. Trim looks good. The legs suffer from that wasting effect. It looks like he has these shins, which are really, really, really stumpy compared to the upper leg. It doesn't look right. I think we can say. And it also means that the head, because it's got that halo and it is a large head and the torso feels a little small, makes the miniature feel very, very stumpy. And in fact, you see the other thigh looks like it's shorter than the upper shin. I mean, with modern sculpting and people saying they want true scale, I think this is one of those cases where it's like, yeah, I think they're onto something because these shins, the lower legs, definitely needed to be lengthened to suit this model. And I think the helmet needed to be shrunk ever so slightly in proportion to the body because it just looks like a ginormous head. You know, from this profile, it looks like his head's the size of his entire torso. It's not, but that's what it looks like. The trim on the shoulders, the shoulder pad trim, yeah, that's more like the sort of shoulders that the Dawnbreakers needed. So again, where is that? Why is this pattern and these swirls used here and they're not used on the other units in the range? It's like, well, it's probably a case of different sculptors worked on these models and took them in different directions. But yeah, it's fine. It's a serviceable miniature. Yeah, it works. Alright, now on to more fun stuff. Raldoron, the first captain of the Blood Angels, and yeah, someone decided to get fancy and paint it in non-metallics, and I don't think it does anything for this particular model. Raldoron, I think, is a lovely model. It's a nice model, and it's good to see this sort of more interesting armor style. It definitely has this sort of artificer set of Mark III going on. At least that's what I feel it is. There are elements of Mark VI in the lower legs, but it works because this is the first captain. He's going to definitely be the one who has the fanciest armor aside from the Primarch. We have... I like the Tacit plates that actually come off the chest. They're not coming off a belt buckle or anything. They're coming off the actual upper chest plate. And it kind of does cover the actual vulnerable points, which is the joints in the legs, if he turns his torso. So, okay, that's actually a nice touch. The model clearly has some more of like those 40k tropes with like the little lanyards here across the chest. Looks good. Also, it's nice that out of his iconography, he doesn't have a billion swirls and again the hook trim. Okay, that's the silly looking fish hook trim going on. Doesn't have that. He's got plain straight edge trim, but with some fancy little additions like this little filigreed head on the knee plate or the winged motif on the arm. Not my favourite set of wings, but he's got them and it works. And this model feels appropriate. And the combi flamer on the belt, very old school Blood Angels taking that sort of weapon. Where does it fall down? Well, I've not seen a helmet provided with him. I think a helmet would have looked really nice. The sword is fine, but I think many people have issues with the Ghostbusters ectoplasm dripping off the blade. Can it be cleaned off? Yeah, it can, but it would have been nice to have a version of this miniature where we actually got to see the sword in its full glory and being wielded, you know, maybe something actually closer to this pose. And the way this guy is wielding his sword would have been nice to see on Raldoron. So a solid entry in the character series, no real flaws or faults that I think detract from the model, just preferences that I would have rathered on it. And that takes us through to Sanguinius, who is the only Primarch sold without a display base. So we spoke about Rogal Dawn having an oversized oval display base for no good reason. Well, Sanguinius' display base, they decided to make an event-exclusive display base, and they sold it in limited quantities, and then they sold it for a bit as a separate item or a bundled item on Forge World. And then, so if you have, like me, the entire collection of Primarchs, here's this odd one out who has no display base. Now, in my case, I got a display base from the Weekender for him and him at the same time, because I have friends in the UK who are really generous and help out in that way, which is great. Thank you so much, guys, for sorting me out. For those of you who did miss out, hey, Uncle Mao, friend in China, he will help you out. So, you know, swings and roundabouts, because, yeah. So that, to me, is just a faux pas. That does nothing at all for the player, removing that base. If you wanted to produce all Primarchs as an option without the scenic base, so people could buy them a little bit cheaper, that's fine. If you want to release all Primarchs with a scenic base, that's fine. But the mix and match approach it does nothing for the customer. And as you know, I'm all about the consumer and their rights, and I find it very unimpressive. Now, as a Primarch model goes, he is one of my least favourite models. I enjoyed painting him, but something about the sort of splay-legged pose and the way the hair poses over the back of it, there is not a lot you can do with this model. Very low posability. And it doesn't look right having him in this pose necessarily without the demon who he's fighting on the scenic base, because then it makes a lot more sense, because the left hand actually ends up holding the horn of the demon that he is slaying as he's driving the spear or the sword through the demon. And it looks really good, like that he would be in that pose because he's fighting this gigantic demon. But against something like a regular Space Marine, this pose makes no sense. Other than that, I guess it's unoffensive, but yeah, could have been better. Definitely, for me personally, one of the weaker entries in the Primarch's range because less posability than pretty much every other Primarch, which is saying something. Even Fulgrim, you can turn the head a little bit. In this, you can't because the sort of sun ray inspired iron halo behind the head, the hair has to go a certain way in order to not break those off. And yeah, the leonine cloak and that's fine. The little Eye of Terror icons, that's what that's called on the chest. Yep, looks fine. The filigree, the trim, all of that on the armor, it's great. It's a Primarch model though, it should be great. But for me personally, and the sword, this rapier, yeah, it's fine. Kind of reminds me of, what's his face from Fantasy, the Slaneshi, the really vainglorious Slaneshi Chaos Warriors character, Sigvald the Magnificent. Sort of reminds me of his rapier. And yeah, whatever. The spear's nice. The Spear of Telesto is definitely the better looking weapon. But yeah. And Sanguinius is not that great a fighter this edition either. I just thought I'd point that out. So yeah, take that how you will. Anyway, that's it. That takes us through to the end of the Blood Angels range review. I think you can all agree it's a rather underwhelming review on my behalf, but this is how I feel about the range. There are so many minor changes that I feel could have been made to these sculpts that would have turned them into 7s, 8s, and 9s, and yet most of them fall into the 4s, 5s, and 6s category. You may feel differently about this, and if you do, please let me know in the comments below. I'm Mac with the Outer Circle. Thank you all for watching, and I'll catch you on the next episode.